On July 30, 1945, President Harry S. Truman issued an order. Given the Japanese government's refusal to accept unconditional surrender, the U.S. military was authorized to select a target from one of 4 cities: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, or Nagasaki, and drop a special bomb anytime after August 3. On August 6, the atomic bomb codenamed Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. On August 9, the bomb codenamed Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. The 2 atomic blasts resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties. The war was already decided, so what drove the U.S., on the verge of victory, to use this ultimate weapon? The most critical reason was the desperate hope to bring home as many surviving American soldiers from the Pacific Theater as possible. After analyzing the losses from a previous amphibious assault against Japan, the U.S. came up with a startling projection. A ground invasion of the Japanese mainland would cost as many as 1 million American casualties. The battle that instilled this profound fear in the U.S. military was the Battle of Okinawa. So what exactly happened in this brutal battle that made the world's strongest military so wary of Japan? In March 1945, having already captured key Japanese outposts like Saipan and Iwo Jima, Allied forces had finally reached Japan's doorstep. Backed by the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, commanded by Admiral Raymond Spruance, and the British Task Force 57, hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers prepared to seize the Ryukyu Islands, just 350 nautical miles from Kyushu, Japan. The Ryukyu archipelago consists of over 140 volcanic islands, including Okinawa. Centrally located within the chain, Okinawa is 340 nautical miles from mainland Japan. The main island has an area of roughly 485 square miles and had a population of 460,000 at the time. The island was of extreme strategic importance to Japan. Along with Iwo Jima, it formed the southern gateway to the Japanese home islands, earning it the nickname the Gate to the Nation. With the American recapture of the Philippines, the loss of Okinawa would mean the end of Japan's sea and air superiority, completely severing its maritime supply lines to Southeast Asia. In October 1944, President Roosevelt ordered the capture of Okinawa, and the specific invasion plan was approved on February 9, 1945. The U.S. military treated this operation with the utmost seriousness, producing tons of planning documents and mobilizing nearly all Allied land and naval forces in the Pacific Theater, with a total of 548,000 personnel. The operation involved 34 aircraft carriers, 22 battleships, 320 other combat vessels, 1,139 auxiliary ships, and 2,108 carrier-based aircraft. A British observer called it the largest and most complex amphibious operation yet undertaken by American forces. The American code name for the battle was Operation Iceberg, implying that the massive force deployed was merely the tip of the iceberg, with its elite forces still held in reserve for the final invasion of Japan. Likewise, Japan placed enormous importance on the fight for Okinawa. On March 20th, new orders from Imperial General Headquarters stated, "Okinawa is the key to the defense of the homeland." Imperial Headquarters emphasized, the bulk of the American invasion force should be annihilated at sea. Ground defense forces on Okinawa must prevent the remaining enemy landing forces from securing a base, thereby ensuring the smooth execution of Operation Tengo. In short, Japan's plan was to throw themselves headfirst at the American landing fleet. Faced with such a suicidal Japanese offensive, how would the Allies prepare? The U.S. set the final landing date for April 1, 1945. They knew that Okinawa's proximity to the mainland meant they would face an all-out counterattack from Japanese air power, especially kamikaze suicide planes. While these suicide attacks might not change the final outcome, they posed an undeniable and massive threat to American forces. The U.S. plan, therefore, was to first launch large-scale airstrikes against Japanese air bases on the mainland, in the Ryukyus, and on Taiwan to weaken their air strength as much as possible. Starting on March 9th, American B-29s began bombing the Japanese mainland and its airfields. To increase effectiveness, the U.S. switched from high-altitude precision daylight bombing to low-altitude nighttime incendiary raids. They stripped the B-29s of all machine guns except the tail gun, boosting their bomb capacity to 7 tons. all of which were incendiary bombs designed to start massive fires. That night, 334 B-29s flew over Tokyo, dropping nearly 2,000 tons of incendiaries in a single night and turning the city into a sea of fire. The firebombing killed an estimated 83,000 Japanese civilians and left hundreds of thousands more homeless. The U.S. then used the same tactics against other major Japanese cities. By March 19th, B-29s had flown roughly 1,600 sorties and dropped nearly 10,000 tons of incendiaries, severely crippling Japan's domestic war effort. At the same time, the U.S. was preparing for the Okinawa invasion. At 4 a.m. on March 26th, the first group of Rear Admiral Morton L. Deo's Task Force 51 began shelling Okinawa. At dawn, American air groups began a comprehensive bombing campaign across the islands, focusing on Japanese airfields and beach defenses. To clear the way for the invasion, U.S. minesweepers worked day and night to clear the sea lanes approaching Okinawa. By March 29th, the mine threat around the islands was largely eliminated. American battleships and cruisers could now approach close to shore for precision bombardment. With all preparations complete, the American landing began on April 1st. At 4 p.m., warships of the Fire Support Group opened fire to cover the troops hitting the beaches. At 8 a.m., the 6th and 1st Marine Divisions and the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions landed along a 9-kilometer stretch of Okinawa's western coast. The 4 divisions, each in 8 waves, advanced in massive formations toward the white sand beaches. At 8:32 a.m., the report came in, first wave has hit the beach. At 10 a.m., news arrived that Kadena and Yonten airfields were in American hands. The landing was so smooth it felt like a peacetime drill. American soldiers everywhere were asking the same question: where are the Japanese? By 4 p.m., U.S. forces had secured most of the coastline. The lack of Japanese resistance was a profound shock. From Admiral Turner, the top commander, down to the common soldier, no one could understand the mysterious disappearance of the Japanese forces. In every previous island battle in the Pacific, U.S. troops had been met with fierce, unyielding fire. The smooth landing continued until the 6th, with still no sign of the Japanese. American tanks and artillery rolled ashore as if into an empty land. On the 4th, U.S. forces easily captured the central part of the island, cutting it in two and splitting the Japanese defense line. A mission the Americans had planned to take 15 days was accomplished in just 4. Had the U.S. really won the Battle of Okinawa that easily? Was Japan really going to give up Okinawa? Of course not. In fact, the main body of the Japanese army was hidden on the island. The architect of this empty fort strategy was General Mitsuru Ushijima, the commander of Japanese forces on Okinawa. This strategy was less a brilliant tactic and more a move born of desperation. In early November 1944, Imperial General Headquarters had ordered the transfer of the 9th Division of Ushijima's 32nd Army to Taiwan. The 9th Division was Ushijima's elite force, equipped with heavy artillery and renowned for its toughness and combat strength. Before the battle, the Japanese couldn't be sure whether the Americans would attack Okinawa or Taiwan. The Japanese commander in Taiwan insisted on having the 9th Division for its defense, which significantly weakened the 32nd Army. This forced Ushijima to abandon his original plan. He had to adopt a new strategy: let the American forces land unopposed, lure them into the hilly interior away from naval and air support, and then annihilate them. But as Ushijima's army played this game of hide and seek, watching the Americans advance so rapidly, Imperial headquarters in Tokyo grew anxious. They devised their own plan to defend Okinawa. Vice Admirals Seiichi Ito and Matomagaki would lead the 2nd Fleet and kamikaze units on a suicide mission into the waters off Okinawa to attack the American fleet and support the island's defenders. At the same time, the military decided to exploit the public's religious fervor and fanatical patriotism by organizing the Kikyusui Special Attack Units within the Air Force. These pilots flew planes packed with explosives, intending to crash them directly into enemy ships. Poisoned by Bushido ideology, these young men embraced the idea of one plane for one ship and glory for 1,000 years, engaging the American surface fleet in a fight to the death. To further bolster Okinawa's defense, on April 6th, The Japanese Navy's super battleship, the Yamato, sortied from Kyushu and headed south for Okinawa, led by the cruiser Yahagi and followed by 8 destroyers. Notably, this was a special attack fleet. It had no air cover and only enough fuel for a one-way trip. The sailors knew this mission to Okinawa was a suicide run from which they would not return. Yet they went to battle singing "Sakura, Sakura." On the morning of the 7th, American forces spotted the Yamato fleet. To prevent a Japanese first strike, the Americans immediately deployed their own forces. More than 40 U.S. warplanes dove through thick, low clouds and a hail of anti-aircraft fire toward the Yamato. Lacking effective air cover, the battleship was hit by a torpedo and 2 heavy bombs. Soon, second and third waves of American planes arrived. After taking 11 torpedo hits, the Yamato finally capsized, taking over 2,000 Japanese sailors down with her. The largest battleship in naval history, the unsinkable Yamato, vanished beneath the endless sea. The sinking of the Yamato was a moment of great excitement for the Americans, but it was short-lived. Starting at 1:30 p.m. on the 11th, a new wave of Japanese suicide attacks began. In this raid, Japan sent 392 aircraft, 202 of them kamikazes. At 2:10 p.m., kamikaze planes flew dangerously low to avoid stalling, hurtling toward the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise and the battleship USS Missouri anchored off Okinawa. After a fierce battle, one Japanese attacker managed to skim past the Enterprise's starboard quarter and crash into the forward part of the ship below the flight deck. Debris flew onto the deck, igniting a fully armed plane on the catapult and starting a major fire. The Japanese suicide attacks inflicted enormous casualties on the Allied forces. From April until the end of the battle, Japan launched a total of 2,153 sorties, including 753 suicide missions. They conducted hundreds of raids, sinking 33 U.S. warships and damaging over 360 more. The fanatical suicide attacks terrified the Americans. U.S. Vice Admiral Charles R. Brown recalled, "To be a spectator of such a scene is a terrifying experience, for you see a plane coming at you, and you know that the pilot has no other object than to kill you, and you know that that pilot is a man who has been trained to do that." In the later stages of the battle, to stop the kamikaze attacks, the Americans set up a screen of 16 radar picket destroyers around Okinawa specifically to detect low-flying Japanese planes. They also developed a method they called smashing the rats in their nests, sending large numbers of carrier aircraft to continuously bomb Japanese airfields, hoping to destroy the planes on the ground before they could take off. This tactic was successful, destroying many suicide planes in their hangars. With Japan unable to replace its losses of aircraft and pilots, the kamikaze attacks gradually came to an end. As Japanese forces outside Okinawa were depleted, an even greater battle was about to unfold on the island itself. What would be the final outcome of this war? While the battle raged at sea and in the air, the fighting on land began, and it was no less brutal. After the deceptively easy initial landing, General Ushijima's strategy of luring the enemy in began to show its effectiveness. Southern Okinawa was the most heavily fortified part of the island. Ushijima took full advantage of the treacherous terrain, cliffs, ravines, and valleys to build strong, concealed defensive positions. From these fortifications, the Japanese army aimed to thwart the American attempt to capture the entire island. Under stiff Japanese resistance, American forces suffered over 4,000 casualties in the 8 days after April 5th and didn't break through the first Japanese defense line until April 24th. On the fiercely contested island of Ieshima, American units measured their advance in bodies, taking 6 full days to capture it. Facing the island's formidable defenses, one American commander lamented, "This is a really tough fight. Down on the southern end of the island, there are between 65,000 and 70,000 Japanese holed up in caves. There's no other way but to blast them out one by one." The Americans advanced under a hail of gunfire, rolling over Japanese trenches and storming their positions. Flamethrower tanks shot napalm into the caves and tunnels where the Japanese were hiding. But the Japanese were quick to counterattack. Under the cover of darkness and smoke, they would quietly organize an orderly retreat to the next defensive line. The battle thus fell into a pattern. The Japanese would make a desperate stand from a fortified position. The Americans, with massive fire support, would achieve a breakthrough. The Japanese would then fall back to the next line and repeat the process. With each cycle, the Japanese held territory shrank. On May 31st, the Americans finally made a major breakthrough, entering the ruins of Shuri Castle. General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., commander of the 10th Army, was overjoyed, thinking the capture of Okinawa's capital meant the battle was nearly over. He had no idea the most brutal fighting was yet to come. Ushijima led his remaining forces back about 6 miles to a final, carefully prepared defensive line at the southern tip of the island, a natural barrier formed by 2 hills. The Japanese again used the terrain to their advantage, building cleverly concealed artillery positions and tunnel networks. Cornered, the Japanese resistance did not weaken. Many Japanese soldiers would grab American soldiers and blow themselves up together. Every foot of American advance was incredibly difficult. On June 21st, American forces broke through to Era Point on the southernmost tip of Okinawa. Knowing their defense was hopeless, Ushijima and his staff realized their time was running out. They sent final telegrams and letters to say farewell to Imperial headquarters. At 4 a.m. on June 23rd, the Japanese commander, Mitsuru Ushijima, dressed in a new uniform adorned with his medals, committed ritual suicide with his staff. On July 2, 1945, the U.S. declared the Battle of Okinawa over. The bloody fight for Okinawa ended in an American victory. Lasting over 3 months, it was the costliest battle for the United States in the Pacific War. American casualties totaled 75,000, including 13,000 dead, and 763 aircraft were lost. At sea, 34 U.S. ships were sunk and 368 were damaged. After the battle, there were no large-scale victory celebrations. Japanese military and civilian deaths on Okinawa totaled 188,000, with losses of 3,400 aircraft and 20 ships. With Okinawa's fall, the Japanese mainland was now completely exposed to Allied attack. The 3-month bloodbath had bought time for Japan's home defense. On April 25, 1945, Imperial General Headquarters issued the slogan of 100 million special attack, calling for the entire population to join the fight, ready for the honorable death of the 100 million. For the United States, the Battle of Okinawa, along with the recent Battle of Iwo Jima, made it impossible to imagine the kind of fanatical resistance they would face in an invasion of the Japanese mainland. This realization, to a large extent, prompted the U.S. decision to use its newly developed atomic bomb against Japan to bring the war to a swift end.